I've started writing this 3 times and deleted it every time. My hands are shaking a little even now. There are only 4 people who know what actually happened to me on Miller's Bridge. My sister, my old friend Danny, the county sheriff I called the next morning, and now you. The sheriff told me I probably just had a panic attack. He said it with the kind of smile people use when they've already decided not to believe you. I nodded and went home. I never brought it up again. Until tonight. I need you to understand something before I start. I was not the kind of person who believed in this stuff. I grew up in Caldwell, Tennessee. Population maybe 1,200 if you counted the people who lived on the ridge roads and only came into town for church and propane. I was the kid who read Scientific American at the back of math class. I debunked the ghost in our school's basement. I thought the Miller's Bridge story was exactly what stories like that always are. A way for small-town parents to keep their teenagers from parking somewhere dark and doing things teenagers do. I was 26 when I found out I was wrong. Every small town has its piece of geography that belongs to fear. In Caldwell, that place was Miller's Bridge, a 2-lane concrete crossing maybe 40 feet long, built in 1961 over Harrow Creek, about 3 miles outside town on Route 9. Nothing special to look at. Rust stains down the guardrails. A crack along the west railing that the county patched with mismatched concrete sometime in the 90s. In daylight it was nothing. Just a bridge. But nobody in Caldwell drove over Miller's Bridge at night if they could help it. That was the thing I could never fully explain away even when I was being rational about it. It wasn't just teenagers or superstitious old women. It was everyone. My father, who was a deacon and had no patience for nonsense, took the long way around on Route 12 after dark, added 11 minutes to any drive. When I was about 12 I asked him why, and he got quiet in a way I'd never seen from him before. There's a rule, he said. If your car ever stops on that bridge at night, you stay inside. You keep your doors locked. You keep your windows up. And if you hear something calling your name from down in that water, you don't answer it. You don't even whisper. You just wait. I asked him what would happen if you did answer. He didn't say anything. He just turned up the radio. The legend, as I eventually pieced it together from different people over the years, was never quite consistent in its details. Some people said it was the ghost of a woman who drowned in the 50s. Some said it was something that had been in that creek long before anyone built a bridge over it, something that learned over time how to use a human voice. Some people didn't even try to explain it. They just said, that bridge is wrong. Like that was sufficient. Like that was the whole story. I thought it was folklore. I thought it was the kind of collective myth that small communities build around places associated with tragedy, to give their fear a shape they could pass down and understand. I wrote a paper about exactly this phenomenon in my sophomore year of college. Got an A-. October. A Thursday night. I was driving back from Knoxville. I'd gone up for a job interview, stayed too long catching up with a friend, and hit the road later than I meant to. It was coming up on midnight by the time I reached Caldwell's outer limits, and I was running low on gas, which meant I needed to get to the station on Route 9 before it closed at 12:30. The shortcut over Miller's Bridge would save me 8 minutes. I remember the exact moment I made the decision. I remember thinking I'm 26 years old, not 12. I remember the small private embarrassment I felt at even hesitating, at even feeling the reflexive pull of a childhood warning tugging at me. I turned onto Route 9. The bridge appeared in my headlights the way it always had, ordinary, gray, unremarkable. The fog was heavier than I expected. This was the first thing that gave me any real pause because the fog wasn't just sitting on the road the way it normally does. It was coming up from beneath the bridge, rising from Harrow Creek in slow, thick columns, spreading across the concrete like something being poured. By the time my front tires hit the bridge surface, my headlights only cut maybe 15 feet ahead. Everything beyond that was a wall of white. I slowed down, crept forward. I was about halfway across. I know because I could see the rusted midpoint marker on the left guardrail when my car died. Not sputtered, not coughed. It just died. Everything went off at once. The engine, the headlights, the radio, the dashboard. Total darkness. I coasted maybe 3 feet and stopped. The silence was immediate and absolute in a way I have never experienced before or since. I've been in quiet places. I've been in the woods at 3 a.m. I've been in empty buildings. This was different. This was the silence of something holding its breath. There was no wind, no creek noise from below, and Harrow Creek is not a quiet creek. I'd grown up hearing it from a quarter mile away on still nights. Nothing. The only sound was my own breathing, which I became suddenly, uncomfortably aware of. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. I checked my phone. No signal, and I had full bars in Knoxville 40 minutes ago. I had 2 bars on Route 9 less than a mile back. 0 bars now. No emergency signal. Nothing. I sat there for probably 2 minutes doing the rational things. Tried the ignition again, tried the phone again, looked in my rearview mirror for headlights from another car. The road behind me was empty. The fog in my mirrors looked almost solid. I was starting to think about getting out and walking to the gas station when I heard it. My name. Quiet. From below. Stretched long like someone calling across a wide field. The way you call to someone you're not sure can hear you. My name in a voice I didn't recognize. Soft and low and patient. Every single hair on my body stood up. I told myself it was someone down at the creek. A fisherman. A teenager who'd parked at the bank. I told myself the acoustics of the fog were doing something strange to a perfectly ordinary sound. I told myself every rational thing I had, rapid fire, like I was trying to build a wall fast enough. Then it called my name again. Closer. Not closer like someone walking up the bank. Closer like the distance between us had simply decreased, without movement, without footsteps. One moment it was below. The next moment the belowness of it was less. I locked my doors. I'm not proud of how fast I did it, but I did it. The fog pressed against the windows. Outside, I could see maybe 18 inches in any direction. The guardrail on the passenger side. A few feet of concrete. Nothing else. Then the voice changed. It was still my name. But now it was in my sister Rachel's voice. Rachel lives in Nashville. She has a specific way of saying my name when she's worried about me, a little higher on the first syllable, like a question. That is what I heard. That exact inflection. From below the bridge. From the fog. I made a sound I am not going to describe. I pressed myself against the driver's door without meaning to. My mind was doing something I can only describe as refusing. Just flat refusal to process what I was hearing, shutting doors as fast as they were being opened. Rachel's voice called my name again. Closer still. Then it called again in another voice. A man's voice this time, older, someone I recognized but couldn't immediately place. And this was almost worse because the fact that it was choosing voices, testing them, implied something about what it was doing that I couldn't look at directly. I sat completely still. I did not answer. Every cell in my body was screaming, and I sat completely still because my father had said don't answer and it was the only instruction I had. Then something knocked on the underside of my car. One knock. Deliberate. Like a knuckle on a door. Directly beneath the driver's seat. I stopped breathing. A second knock. Same place. Slower. Then nothing for a long time. When the voice came again, it wasn't from below. It was level with the driver's window. Right outside my door. I turned my head slowly. The fog was against the glass. I could not see the guardrail anymore. I could not see anything, just white, pressing close, and my own reflection ghosted over it. Nothing there. I turned back to face the windshield. The voice whispered my name directly into my left ear. From inside the car. That is what it felt like. That close. And then it said something else. A sentence. Something specific. Something I am choosing not to repeat here, because it doesn't matter and because I haven't repeated it to anyone and I don't want to write it down. I will tell you only that it was something I had never spoken aloud to another person. Something I had thought once, alone, during the worst night of my life, and never externalized in any form. The kind of thought that lives in the locked room. The kind of thought you don't even let yourself finish. It said that thought back to me in a voice that was almost, but not quite, my own. I screamed. I don't know what I screamed. I grabbed the ignition out of pure animal panic, turned the key, and the engine started. Cling. Immediate. Like it had never stopped. The headlights came on. The radio came on mid-song like nothing had happened. And I drove off that bridge so fast I felt the undercarriage scrape the road on the far side where the pavement dips. I drove to the gas station. I sat in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights for 45 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car. The attendant, a teenager, bored, not unfriendly, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Car trouble. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that was older than his face. Were you on Route 9? He asked. I didn't answer. I pumped my gas and I drove home. 3 weeks later, I was back in Caldwell visiting my father, and I went to the local historical society, which is really just 2 rooms in the back of the library, run by a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Alton. I told her I was doing some research on local history. I asked about Harrow Creek. She pulled out a folder without me specifying further. Like she knew. In 1987, a man named Gerald Pruitt was driving home from a late shift at the paper mill. His car stalled on Miller's Bridge. It was October. The water was cold. The official report says he got out of his vehicle. Despite what everyone in Caldwell knew, despite what everyone in Caldwell said, he got out, and at some point went over the railing. They found him 2 days later, downstream. He had no history of self-harm. No alcohol in his system. No medical event. There was no explanation for why he went over the railing. The investigating officer noted in the file, and Mrs. Alton showed me this line specifically, pointing at it with one finger, that Pruitt's car was found idling, engine running, in the middle of the bridge, as if it had started back up on its own. I thanked her. I drove home the long way on Route 12. I have taken Route 12 every single time since. The thing that keeps me awake, the thing that has kept me awake for years now and I suspect will keep me awake for the rest of my life, is not what I heard that night. It's not the voice or the knocking or the fog. It's that at no point did it ask me to do anything. It didn't tell me to get out. It didn't try the door. It just called my name, got closer, learned my voice, said the thing it knew I had never told anyone, like it was just getting acquainted, like whatever it was doing that night was not the destination, like it was only the introduction. My grandfather warned me about the cornfield the night before he died. I need you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this, because I've been sitting here for 3 days trying to figure out how to write this post, and every time I start, I stop. I close the laptop. I go make coffee. I sit by the window and stare at the backyard of my apartment in Columbus and remind myself that I am 400 miles away from Harlan County, from the farmhouse, from the field. But I can still see it when I close my eyes. That silhouette. The way the head tilted. So I'm going to write this down. All of it. Because I think maybe if I get it out of my head and into words, it'll stop feeling like something crouched behind my eyes. I don't know. Maybe not. Some background for those of you who don't know me. I grew up in Columbus. My parents are both from small towns. Dad from outside Dayton, mom from a little place in central Indiana called Millersburg, population maybe 800 people and one gas station that closes at 7. My grandparents on my mom's side, Earl and Dorothea Marsh, lived their entire lives on a 200-acre farm about 6 miles outside Millersburg. Corn, soybeans, a small vegetable garden my grandmother tended like it was a second child. I spent every summer there from age 5 through about 14, when summer started meaning jobs and friends and all the reasons teenagers stopped going to grandmother's house. But this past June I was between things. Job fell apart in April. Lease ended in May. My grandmother called, she's 81 now, still sharp as a nail but slowing down, and she said Earl isn't doing so well, honey, and I think he'd love to see you. So I went. I packed my car and I drove out to Millersburg and I pulled down that long gravel driveway and the smell hit me before I even got out of the car. Cut grass. Turned soil. That thick green corn smell that I always associated with being a kid, with being safe, with summer meaning something good. My grandfather was on the porch when I pulled up. He looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. He had an oxygen line running to a tank just inside the screen door, and he was sitting in his old wooden chair like he'd been placed there and forgotten. But when he saw me, he smiled, and for a second he looked exactly the way I remembered him from when I was 7 years old. There she is, he said. I hugged him for a long time. The first 2 weeks were fine. Good even. I helped my grandmother with the house, drove into town for groceries, sat with my grandfather in the evenings while he watched the news and made commentary that was equal parts grumpy and hilarious. His health was clearly declining. The oxygen, the way he tired easily, the medications lined up on the kitchen counter like a small pharmacy, but his mind was there. Fully, completely there. He told me stories I'd never heard before. About growing up on that land, about his own grandfather who'd built the original farmhouse in 1911. About the town, the people, the slow changes that had come over the decades. And one night, about 2.5 weeks in, he told me about the field. We were sitting on the back porch. It was late, maybe 10:30, and the sky was doing that thing it does out there in the flat middle of the country where you can actually see the Milky Way, this whole smear of cold light above you, and the corn was tall and dark and went all the way to the tree line at the back of the property. There was a little wind. Just enough to make the stalks whisper. My grandfather had been quiet for a while. We were both just looking out at it. Then he said out of nowhere, "You don't go into the corn at night." I looked at him. What? Into the field. At night? He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the corn. You stay inside after dark. I laughed a little gently. Okay, sure. Coyotes. He shook his head slowly. No. Then what? He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that I thought maybe he drifted, the way he sometimes did in the evenings when he was tired. Then, something comes to the edge sometimes. At night. Stands there. I didn't say anything. I don't know what it is. I've never known. My father saw it. His father saw it. You don't go out there at night. And you don't shine lights at it. He paused. And if it comes to the house, you stay inside. You understand me? He turned and looked at me then, and his eyes were completely clear. This was not confusion. This was not a sick old man wandering in his memories. He was looking straight at me, and he was serious in the way that people are serious when they are telling you something true that they have never told anyone. I understand, I said. He nodded once. Then he looked back at the corn. Good. We didn't talk about it again. I didn't push him. I don't fully know why. Maybe because some part of me recognized that there are things old people know about the places they've lived that don't translate into explanation. Some knowledge is just knowledge. You take it and you hold it. He died 4 days later. Quietly, in his sleep, in the bedroom he'd shared with my grandmother for 56 years. I was down the hall. I didn't hear anything. I want to stop here and say, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking grief does things to people. You're thinking that an old man dying in a farmhouse after telling you a creepy story about the field is going to prime your brain to see things, to hear things, to turn the ordinary darkness of a rural night into something else. I thought about that. I've thought about it a lot. It doesn't explain the footprints, but I'll get there. The week after the funeral was hard and slow and full of casseroles. People from town kept coming by. My grandmother held herself together with a kind of quiet dignity that made me want to cry every time I looked at her. I stayed. I wasn't going to leave her there alone. I started sleeping in the back bedroom, the one with the window that looks out over the rear field. My grandfather's warning had settled somewhere in the back of my mind. I wasn't afraid exactly. It was more like I'd been handed a rule, and I intended to follow it, the way you follow the rules of a house you're a guest in. Out of respect. The night it happened was a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the funeral. It was hot. That flat, breathless heat that sits on central Indiana in July like a hand pressed down on everything. I had the window open. I was lying on top of the sheets reading, probably around midnight, and I put my book down because I couldn't concentrate, and I looked out the window at the field. I looked out there, I think because I'd been doing it since my grandfather told me that thing. Every night I'd look out at the field before I went to sleep, the way you check a room before you settle into it, like I was confirming that everything was fine. The corn was maybe 8-9 feet tall by then. Dark. The field started about 30 yards from the back of the house. There was the yard, the old wooden fence, then the field. No moon that night, or not much of one. The stalks were just dark shapes against a slightly lighter sky. I was looking at it, casually, the way I always did, when I noticed something at the edge of the tree line. Something tall. I want to be careful here because I want to be accurate. I didn't see it clearly. It was dark. It was far away at the back of the field, maybe 150 yards out. But there was something there that was taller than the corn. Taller than it should have been by a significant amount. The corn was 8-9 feet. This was, I don't know, 12 feet? 13? It's hard to judge at distance in the dark. And it was still. Completely, absolutely still. I told myself it was a tree. There are trees at the back of the property, along the fence line. Except I knew that field. I'd walked that field as a kid. I knew where the trees were. And whatever I was looking at was standing in the middle of the corn rows, not at the edge. I watched it for maybe 3 minutes, not moving, just watching. Then it moved. I want to explain this carefully because it's the part that I keep coming back to, the part that makes the least sense to me even now. It moved from one position to another. Maybe 20 feet to the left, along the tree line. And it happened slowly, not fast, not jerky. Almost like it was walking. Deliberately. Like it was relocating. But the corn didn't move. I was watching the field and there was no ripple, no wave of displaced stalks, no rustle that travels ahead of a body moving through rows of corn. Anyone who has ever walked through a cornfield, and I spent half my childhood doing exactly that, knows that you cannot move through standing corn without the corn moving around you. It's physical law. You displace the stalks. They bend, they brush, they mark your passage. The corn was completely still. It moved 20 feet and not a single stalk moved. I sat up in bed. My heart was going fast and I was aware of it in that strange, detached way where part of your brain is outside your body watching you and saying you are afraid. This is what being afraid feels like. I sat up and I gripped the windowsill and I stared at the place where it had stopped. It was still again. Taller than the corn. Standing between the rows. Watching the house. I don't know how I knew it was watching the house. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see eyes. It was dark and it was far away and it was just a silhouette against slightly lighter dark. But something about the orientation of it, something about the way it was positioned, communicated attention in a way I can't explain any better than that. The way you can tell across a room that someone is looking at you even before you look back at them. It was looking at the house. I closed the window. I know that doesn't make any logical sense. A window screen is not going to stop something 12 feet tall, but I closed it and I sat on the edge of the bed and I stared at the glass. I think an hour passed, maybe more. I didn't sleep. I just sat there. And then I heard it. It started at the far corner of the house, the northwest corner near the old cellar doors, and it came slowly around the perimeter. A dragging sound. Heavy. Uneven. Like something being pulled through dirt, through gravel. Pause. Pause. Moving along the side of the house, around toward the back. I want you to understand the specific horror of that sound in a dark house in the middle of rural Indiana at 1 in the morning. There is nothing around that house for miles. No road close enough for traffic noise. No neighbors. Just fields and sky and the distant occasional sound of a train on the tracks 2 miles east. That dragging sound was the only sound in the world. It came around the back of the house, beneath my window. I did not look out. I sat on the edge of that bed and I looked at the opposite wall and I did not move and I did not make a sound. My grandfather's voice was in my head. If it comes to the house, you stay inside. I stayed inside. The sound stopped directly beneath the back window. I don't know for how long. Time stopped working correctly. It could have been 2 minutes or 20. There was nothing, just silence and the impression of something directly outside, separated from me by a wall and a closed window, and I have never in my life felt so completely viscerally aware of how thin the materials of a house are. Drywall. Insulation. What? Blast. That's all. That's all that's there. Then it continued. Around the other side of the house. Back the way it had come or somewhere else, I don't know. The sound faded. And then there was nothing. At some point I slept. I don't remember making the decision to sleep. I just woke up at 7 in the morning with the sun coming through the curtains and birds making noise in the yard and the smell of my grandmother's coffee coming up from the kitchen. And for about 4 seconds everything was fine. Everything was just a summer morning on a farm. Then I remembered. I went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and I drank my coffee and I didn't say anything to my grandmother. What was I going to say? I kept thinking about what my grandfather had told me. How he'd said it like a rule. A known thing. Not like he was afraid exactly, more like he'd made his peace with it. Something comes to the edge sometimes. Like you make your peace with a flooded road or a field that won't yield. It's there. You know it's there. You work around it. He'd lived with that knowledge for 80 years. After breakfast, when my grandmother went to call her sister, I went to the back door. I stood there for a minute. Then I went outside. I walked across the yard. I unlatched the fence gate. I walked into the field. I followed the outer edge of the field around toward the back, walking along the fence because I wasn't ready to go all the way in. I was just looking, trying to find the place I'd seen it standing. I didn't find that. What I found was something else. About 60 yards from the back of the house, at the point where the field opens into the widest section, I found the circle. It was maybe 20 feet across. A perfect circle of flattened corn, every stalk pressed to the ground, pointing outward from the center like a starburst. Not broken, flattened, bent at the base, laid down flat and smooth and deliberate. The pressed stalks were so uniform, so even, that the circle looked almost decorative. Like something that had taken care. I stood at the edge of it and I looked at the center. And I saw the footprints. I've been trying to think about how to describe them and I keep failing to do it justice, so I'll just tell you exactly what I saw. They were human in shape. 2 feet. A heel and arched toes. Completely recognizable as footprints. But they were long. I stepped next to one and it ran from my heel to roughly 6 inches past my extended fingertips when I held my arms straight. I'm 5'6". I have average-sized hands. Those footprints were somewhere between 20 and 24 inches long. And they were deep. Whoever, whatever, had stood in that circle had stood there for a while, or had been very, very heavy, because the prints had pressed down through the flattened corn into the soil beneath, a solid inch into packed dirt. There were 2 of them. Just 2. Right next to each other, slightly staggered, like something standing with its weight distributed evenly. Facing the house. Just standing there. Facing the house. I took pictures. I have them on my phone. I've looked at them probably 100 times since I got back to Columbus, zooming in, trying to find the explanation I know should be there. A prank. Kids. Some kind of farm equipment. Something. I don't have an explanation. I stayed another week after that because I wasn't going to leave my grandmother alone, and nothing else happened. No sounds at night. No shapes at the field's edge. Either it didn't come back or I just didn't look. I kept the window closed. I didn't look. I think about my grandfather a lot. About him sitting on that porch for 80 years, knowing that thing was out there. Coming to the edge sometimes. Standing in the corn. Watching the house. And he just lived with it. Built his life there. Loved that land. Raised kids and grandkids and kept the rule and passed it down, the way you pass down which drawer the silverware is in or which step on the stairs creaks. Something comes to the edge sometimes. You don't go out at night. He knew. He always knew. And he stayed anyway. I keep thinking that's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most frightening. Maybe both. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to tell you I do. I'm not going to offer a theory or a legend or something I found on the internet about Midwest folklore that might explain it. I looked. I found a few things that rhyme with it, vaguely. None of them helped. What I know is this: it was real. I saw it. I heard it. I found where it stood. And whatever it is, it has been there for a very long time. My great-great-grandfather built that farmhouse in 1911. Whatever was standing in that field last July was standing there before the house was built. Before the corn was planted. Before any of us were there. We moved into its place. It didn't leave. It just started watching. Edit? Yes, I still have the pictures. No, I'm not posting them right now. I don't know if I will. I need to think about it. Edit 2. To the person in the comments asking if I'd go back. I don't know. My grandmother is still there. She's not leaving. She was born in that county and she'll die in that county. And I think she knows about it too. I think she's always known. I think she's just made her peace with it. Maybe that's what you do. I've never told anyone the full story. My wife thinks I fell asleep at the wheel that night. My therapist thinks it was a dissociative episode triggered by sleep deprivation. They're both wrong, and some part of me has been waiting, maybe bracing, for the moment someone finally believed me enough for me to say it out loud. So here it is. Here's what actually happened. It was a Wednesday in late October. I'd been driving since early afternoon. A consulting job 3 states over, the kind of work where you show up, fix the problem, and leave before anyone learns your last name. I was heading home on Route 9, the old 2-lane that runs through the hill towns before it feeds into the interstate. I knew it was getting late, but I'd made this drive before. I wasn't worried. I noticed the fuel light around 11. I'd been ignoring it for 30 miles the way you do when you're close to home and telling yourself you'll make it. But the towns were thinning out. The signs for the next exit kept pushing further. I turned on my hazards for a second, turned them off, and told myself to find something before the highway stretch. 40 unbroken miles with nothing but guardrails and darkness. That's when I saw it. A small orange glow through the tree line. A gas station I didn't remember from any of my previous drives. The place was old in a way that felt deliberate, like it had been arranged to look abandoned without quite committing to it. 2 pumps under a rusted canopy, 1 bulb flickering. No other cars. A hand-painted sign in the window said open in letters too large and too red. Inside, a single fluorescent tube hummed above a wall of cigarettes and dusty air fresheners. The clerk was an older man, maybe 70, with the kind of stillness you notice before you notice anything else. He didn't look up when I came in. He was watching something on a small mounted television, static, mostly, with shapes moving through it that I couldn't make out. When I set my coffee and my cash on the counter, he finally turned. His eyes were clear. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Perfectly clear and completely terrified. You heading to the highway? He asked. His voice was quiet, like he'd decided some time ago to keep it that way. I said yes. I said I'd probably make it home by 1. He put my change on the counter without touching my hand. He looked back at his television. Then, just as I was turning for the door, he said it, soft, no drama, like a man reciting something he'd memorized for a very long time. If someone waves at you from the road tonight, don't stop. I laughed a little. I said something like thanks for the advice. He didn't smile. He didn't respond at all. He was already watching the static again. I'd been back on Route 9 for maybe 20 minutes when I saw the figure. It was standing at the far edge of the shoulder, right where the gravel ends and the tall grass begins. Still far enough that my headlights hadn't reached it yet. I only saw it because of the way the darkness changed around it, the way your eyes detect the outline of something before they can name it. At first I thought it was a deer. Then I thought it was a mailbox. Then the arm moved. Slow. Steady. The unmistakable arc of someone waving you down. A stranded driver. A person in distress. Every reasonable part of my brain started building the story. Flat tire, dead phone, lost. I eased off the gas. My hand went to the hazards. And then I remembered what the clerk said, and I felt, I don't know how else to say this, I felt that the memory arrived a half second too late. Like something had almost succeeded in making me forget. I kept driving. Didn't stop. Hands at 10 and 2 eyes straight. I passed it. Or I passed where it was standing. I didn't look directly at it. A mile down the road I checked the rearview mirror. I don't know why. I think some instinct that predates reason told me to look. The figure was still there. Behind me. Standing in the center of the road. Still waving. I told myself it was a trick of distance, of perspective. I'd simply misjudged how far back it was when I passed. I kept driving. I turned on the radio. I told myself about sleep deprivation and the way darkness distorts. A minute later I looked again. It was closer. Not a lot. But unmistakably, measurably closer. And I had not stopped, had not slowed, had put another mile of road between us. The figure was smaller than before in the way that it should have been invisible by now. Instead it was the size of a person standing maybe 200 yards back. Still in the center of the lane. Still waving. That slow, deliberate wave, like a flag being raised in no particular hurry. I drove faster. I kept my eyes on the road and told myself I was done checking the mirror. I told myself this for about 45 seconds. Then I looked again. It was right behind the car. Close enough that I could see the arms still moving. Close enough to see that its head was turned slightly to one side, the way an animal watches something it doesn't recognize. Close enough that my headlights, bouncing back from the road, were almost catching the edge of it. I made a sound I'm not proud of. I floored it. And I didn't look in that mirror again. Not once. Not for 27 miles until the highway entrance ramp swept me up into the lights and the lane markers and the other cars in the ordinary world. At the entrance ramp I finally looked. The road behind me was empty. Just black asphalt and the white line fading into darkness. Gone. I got home at 1:14 in the morning. My wife was asleep. The house smelled like the candle she burns when she's reading in bed. I stood in the kitchen for a while, drinking water, listening to the refrigerator hum, and I started to convince myself. That's what the mind does. It has a self-preservation instinct that works against memory. It starts dissolving things that don't fit, sanding the edges down until it's just a weird drive home, just a tired man, just shadows. I went out to bring in my bag from the car. That's when I noticed it. The rear passenger door was not latched. The interior light had been off. I would have seen it if the light had been on. But the door was sitting about an inch open, the way a door sits when someone has pulled it shut from the inside without quite catching the latch. I stood there on my driveway for a long time. I had not put anything in my back seat that night. I had not opened that door since I left for the job 2 days earlier. And I had driven 40 miles on the highway without hearing wind noise, without the door sensors alerting, because the door had not been opened during the highway drive. It had been opened after I pulled into my neighborhood. After I turned off the highway. After the last stretch of dark road. I went inside. I locked the door. I have never been entirely sure when I walk into a quiet room that the quiet means what quiet is supposed to mean. I still check the back seat before I get in the car. Every time. Even in daylight. Even in my own driveway. I check it because once, just once about 3 weeks after that night, there was something on the seat I didn't put there. A smear of dark mud. A single dried handprint, fingers spread, facing up. The size of a child's hand. Or something that had learned once to approximate one.